Hello, welcome to the 2022 Lane County Cultural Coalition online grant writing workshop. My name is Erin Bartley, and I am a board member of the Lane County Cultural Coalition. Today, I'll be talking to you about our cultural opportunity grants and helping you learn a little bit more about how to write a really strong grant application. So, here's our workshop agenda. First, I'm going to give you an overview of the Oregon Cultural Trust, which is our granting organization, as well as a little bit of information about the Lane County Cultural Coalition. And then we're going to jump right into the grant application. And I'll talk to you about some of the terminology that we use and give you some specific tips about how to write a really strong application. And then I'll share with you some helpful resources at the very end. So let's start with an overview of the Oregon Cultural Trust and the Lane County Cultural Coalition. So Oregon is the only state with a cultural trust. The trust has a permanent fund, which now has more than $25 million in it. And the idea of this fund is that it can support increased access to the arts and culture in Oregon for generations to come. So the Oregon Cultural Trust provides over $1.8 million a year in competitive grants to organizations and individuals across Oregon. So the Oregon Cultural Trust can distribute those funds directly to the organizations and individuals. It also works with partners, which include the Oregon Arts Commission, the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office, Oregon Humanities, the Oregon Heritage Commission, and the Oregon Historical Society. And finally, the Oregon Cultural Trust works with 45 county and tribal coalitions who subgrant to local projects. And that's where the Lane County Cultural Coalition comes in. So we receive funds from the Oregon Cultural Trust, just like the other county and tribal coalitions, and we distribute those grants to local individuals and organizations in Lane County. So that's our job. So the Oregon Cultural Trust is really amazing. The way that it works is that when Oregon citizens donate to arts organizations, humanities organizations, heritage organizations, and cultural organizations, at the same time, they can donate to the Oregon Cultural Trust in the same amount. And that amount that they donate to the Oregon Cultural Trust, they'll get back in the form of a tax credit when they submit their taxes. But the Oregon Cultural Trust takes those donations and then they distribute them out to those individuals and those organizations, as I described with the last slide. So essentially, when you donate to the Oregon Cultural Trust, your donation is going twice as far. So it's really amazing. And the money goes to fund really wonderful projects. So for example, over the last couple years, the Lane County Cultural Coalition has funded a number of projects which have included arts classes for people living in assisted living facilities in Florence. It's included the rehabilitation of the foundation and the porch of the Crestwell Heritage Foundation's historic schoolhouse. It has supported the purchase of award-winning books for children through the SMART program. And it has supported the Disorient Film Festival, which is a film festival featuring the work of Asian and Pacific Islander American filmmakers. So these are just a small handful of the projects that we've been able to fund over the last few years. We really encourage you, if you have the ability, to donate to the Oregon Cultural Trust when you donate to arts, humanities, heritage, and cultural organizations. And you can see here that the website is culturaltrust.org. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the Lane County Cultural Coalition. So we distribute grant funds in order to provide recognition and support to significant cultural programs and projects in the areas of the arts, heritage, and the humanities. We want to preserve and enhance Lane County's diverse arts, heritage, and humanities efforts in order to support a vibrant cultural life for the people of Lane County. We have 12 board members who represent Lane County's geographic areas. We have 2 reps from each county commissioner's district. We have 1 representative from our fiscal sponsor, which is Lane Arts Council, 1 at-large member, and a paid part-time administrator. In our board members, we hope to reflect the diversity of cultural affiliations and expertise in Lane County. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we fund. So again, we fund projects in the arts, humanities, and heritage that enhance the cultural life of Lane County. We're really looking here for projects that have a clear beginning, middle, and an end, not ongoing projects, not operating expenses. We usually get requests of about $500 to $2,500, and we're looking for projects that take place within the calendar year. So for this round, we're looking for projects that take place between January 1st and December 31st of 2023. A couple slides ago, I showed you some examples of the kinds of projects we fund, and here are a couple others. As you can see in the lower left corner, we funded in the last year a Black Cultural Festival that took place during the summer, and we funded artists' expenses for that festival. We also funded research, the salaries for researchers who were working on a digital resource that focuses on public history, art, and monuments in Lane County. So these are the examples, some more examples of the kinds of projects that we fund. We fund individuals and we fund organizations. Those organizations can include schools, agencies, governments, groups, nonprofits, and for-profits. You don't have to be a 501c3 or have a fiscal sponsor to apply. If you'd like to see some examples of individuals and organizations that we funded, you can go to our website to see those, and I'll give you the website address at the end of this presentation. Here's a picture of the Oregon Children's Choir. They have written a number of successful grant applications. So to be aware, we do not fund operating expenses, grants to offset previous expenses, tuition assistance for college, university, or other formal courses of study. We don't fund events or projects whose primary purpose is to raise funds. So no donor recognition events or solicitation events or grant writing events or grant writing projects. And finally, we don't fund events or projects whose primary purpose is for a non-cultural cause. And our last question, of course, is when do we fund? This year's deadline is October 14th of 2022 at 5 p.m. And we will get back in touch with you in December of 2022 with a decision. Next, I'm going to talk about how to write a successful cultural opportunity grant application. So when you open the grant application, which you can again find on our website, you'll see 4 different sections to that application. The first section focuses on applicant information, so a bit about you, the grant writer, and about your organization. Second, it will ask for information about your project overview. Then you'll have a series of project questions, which will ask you to give more information about your project, including things like needs, goals, a timeline, and a budget. And then finally, there's a short section that's an authorization and a checklist. So in what follows, I'm really going to focus in on the second and third parts of this application, the project information and the project question. So the section on project information is very basic. We're just looking for some simple descriptions of your project, namely your project's discipline and priority, which I'll talk about in a little bit, the amount you're requesting, the title of your project, whether or not your organization has been previously funded by the Lane County Cultural Coalition, and then a brief description of your organization. So when you have to answer the question about your project discipline, you're going to pick arts, humanities, or heritage. So the arts could include visual arts, performing arts, design, architecture, and craft. Humanities could include literature, language, history, philosophy, criticism, economics, and political science. And heritage can include tangibles or intangibles passed down from earlier generations. So those could be cultural or they could be natural. They could include things like cultural knowledge, gardening techniques. They could be focused on historic buildings, for example. And then you're going to answer a question about project priority. So you're going to choose one: access, awareness, or education. You really have to choose just one, not more than one, and you need to think very carefully about this. I'm going to go over these in more detail because here's where people tend to struggle a bit. So access is really about increasing access to the arts, to culture, to the humanities, to heritage. So if you're doing an access project, you'd be focusing on removing barriers to affordability, accessibility, and inclusivity. You might be providing new opportunities to access arts and cultural events, activities, and sites. So access can include things like supporting venue costs, subsidizing tickets for attendees, providing funding for your artists, preserving historic properties, transportation costs, internet resources, etc. Some specific examples from the last couple of years. Comunidad y Herencia Cultural has supported an event called Noche Cultural. This is a free event that celebrates the history, traditions, and folklore of Mexico. And this organization requested funding to support musicians and dancers to perform at Noche Cultural. So that was how they provided an access project for the community. The Cottage Theater was focusing on access for patrons with hearing aids, so they installed a hearing loop in their auditorium to increase access in that way. Ophelia's Place is currently creating opportunities for underserved female-identified youth to engage in online creative activities and workshops. So this includes youth that live in rural areas where there's limited access to out-of-school arts programming. So these are different ways that different organizations have considered how to provide increased access to the arts, to culture, to heritage. Our second priority, awareness, focuses on raising awareness of the arts, heritage, and humanities. That could be focused on raising awareness of some aspect of the arts or humanities or heritage that people don't know that much about. It could be focused on raising awareness of your organization through marketing or public relations efforts. It could be focusing on reaching out to new audiences, people who might not have been aware of what's available to them. So some examples from 2021. The West African Cultural Arts Institute focused on redesigning their website to make it more effective. The Mackenzie River Discovery Center installed roadside and on-site interpretive signage to raise awareness of what was available at the center. And the Cottage Grove Chamber of Commerce hung banners around town, highlighting the rich heritage of that region. So our third priority, education, as might be obvious, really focuses on teaching something, right? That your project has some measurable learning outcomes, things you'd like to teach participants. So this might be presented in the form of a program, a workshop, a mentorship. You might be supporting underfunded subjects. And an educational priority can support things like artist fees, materials, rental fees, etc. So as some examples, the Octopus School of Drums is facilitating drumming workshops for children at a psychiatric care facility. And the children are learning both about sort of the basics of drumming, and they're also, and thinking about music in that way. They're also learning about the way that music and drumming can be used as self-soothing and healing mechanisms. The Very Little Theater is currently training volunteers in technical theater skills to help support the theater. And then Word Crafters has hosted a free virtual bi-monthly LGBTQIA reading group for LGBTQIA high school teens and allies in Eugene. So again, different ways that different organizations have thought about educational projects. So if the project overview is where you provide the big picture of the project, the basics of the project questions are really where you're going to elaborate on your project, what the project is, what the need for it is, who it will serve, what your goals are, how you're going to implement your project, what your budget is, etc. So here's where you make the case for your project. Let us know what this project is and why we should fund you. So the first question asks for a brief description of your project, as well as how LCCC funds will be used. Here's where we really want to know what this project is. Some of our tips. Be sure to really focus on only the project you want us to fund. We don't need to know all about your organization here. In fact, we don't want to know all about your organization here. We really want to know about this project. And be sure to tell us how you'll specifically spend LCCC's funds. So our funding might cover the entire project, and that's great. And you can tell us, what are the different parts of this project you want us to fund. Or it might be funding just one part of that project, just one element of this larger project, and we want to know that as well. So what will we be funding here? We also want to know in question number 2, how the project fits your chosen priority of access, awareness, or education. You're really going to want to choose one of those priorities. And in the previous slides, I talked at length about what each of those priorities might be. So you want to think about which of these priorities does your project really fit? Number 3 is focused on the need for the project and the audience it will serve. We also want to know how you determined the need for this project. So again, why is your project necessary, and who is it really going to serve? As you think about the project need and the audience, you want to make sure you're clearly identifying your specific audience, not just residents of Lane County, but who in Lane County are you really trying to reach out to here? And then you also want to talk about the need for the project in terms of quantifiable trends or data or research more generally. What research exists that can support the need for this project? So for example, if you're noticing that you have had a decreased rate of attendance at your events and you want to increase that attendance, show us through data what the numbers have been. Don't just give us an anecdote like we have noticed this, but instead give us those numbers. We noticed in December of 2021 that our numbers were here, but in June of 2022 our numbers were here. So give us that data. You might also look outside of your organization or the region for research. So for example, if you are making the case that increased access to the arts is beneficial to your audience, there's likely some research out there that will support your claim. So find that research and provide it to us. Help us understand the need for the project through reference to research. So here's an example of a need statement that is really effective and one that's not so effective. So imagine that someone was writing a grant and they were proposing a touring production of Hamlet to middle schools. A weak example of a need statement would say, there are currently no Shakespeare productions in these middle schools. A touring production of Hamlet will ensure that there's a production in each school. Well, that does show that there aren't any productions, but it doesn't show why it's so necessary or important to have these productions. So on the right hand of the screen, you can see an example of a strong need statement that uses research to show why it's so important to bring this touring production of Hamlet to the middle schools. Studies demonstrate that students who see live theater receive higher reading scores, but 90% of the middle school students at these schools have never attended a live performance. This project will bring live theater to an underserved audience, helping to increase students' reading scores. So there you can see how this writer has really made a case for why it's so important to bring this touring production to the middle schools. So the fourth question asks you to talk about how your project supports diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's talk about those terms a bit. A project that supports diversity would highlight the experiences or perspectives of diverse communities. A project supporting inclusion would support members of an underserved community in participating in an activity or process. So for example, you might be providing access to particular types of arts or humanities or heritage experience that people might not otherwise have access to. Equity is looking to address the needs of an underserved community by providing resources or opportunities. I've used the term underserved communities a few times, and you can see a definition of that term on the right-hand side. So an underserved community would be a community that faces barriers in accessing arts, humanities, or heritage projects. And that might be due to their geographic location, their income, their race or ethnicity, language, immigration status, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, health status, etc. So that's how to think about the term underserved community. So you want to think about how your project supports diversity, equity, or inclusion, and talk about that in your response to this question. So in the next question, you want to talk about your specific project goals. And these goals, you want to think about them very carefully. What are you trying to do with this project? Again, they should be specific. You don't want to have really sort of vague and general goals. Oh, well, we'd like to increase access, or we'd like to increase awareness. That's great, but that's not very specific. What specifically do you want to do to increase access? You want these goals to be measurable. By the end of the project, you want to be able to look at data and figure out to what extent have you achieved your goals. And you want them to be realistic. You know, you have a year here to complete this project. What can you reasonably do in that amount of time? So as you think about these goals, you also want to pay attention to your priority when you identify the goals. So remember, for access, you're thinking about who or how many will gain access to cultural activities as a result of your project. So for example, if you want to increase audience participation at your events, how many people would you hope to serve? And you can just write that out in your answer to question 5A. For awareness, you're thinking about how the project will increase people's knowledge of cultural activities. So what specifically do you want people to be aware of? And how many people do you want to reach? So again, the more specific, the better. With education, you want to think about the learning outcomes. What kinds of content do you want people to learn about? What kinds of skills do you want them to learn about? All right, so again, the more specific you can be, the better. You want to choose project goals that are measurable, and you want to choose project goals that are realistic. So remember, you're choosing measurable goals. And the idea with this is at the end of the project, or perhaps as you work through the project, you're going to work to determine whether the specific goals have been met. So here is where you plan out how you will determine whether your specific goals are met. So in your answer to this question, talk about the specific methods or technologies you're going to use to measure success. Are you going to use surveys, tests, audience counts, etc.? If you know the technology you're going to use, include that. You want to think, are your methods reliable? Are they effective? And you want to talk about what kind of information you can get from these methods. So that's something to think about when you're answering these questions. How exactly are you going to determine whether your specific goals are met? Just lay that out for us step by step. Okay. Question number 6 talks about your work plan. Here is where we want to know what you're going to do when. How are you going to accomplish this project? Be really specific here. We want key dates, we want benchmarks, we want the specific activities you're going to accomplish and when you're going to accomplish them. So, make sure your work plan is comprehensive. Make sure that it's reasonable and manageable. So we want to know the details. We also want to see this is really a project that could be completed within this calendar year. So again, remember that the grant fund is designated for expenditures made between January 1st and December 31st. So you should keep your work plan to that calendar year. Okay. Question number 7 really focuses on the resources that you've already secured to complete your project. So here you want to think about the people who are involved. Who is going to provide you with professional expertise? Are you inviting people in? Are you using people who are already within your organization? So what's your organizational capacity? What kind of experience do people in your organization have? And here you can include volunteers, right? This might be paid people, this might be volunteers. You also want to talk to us about a facility or venue. Maybe you have secured your facility already. That would be great. If you have other funding that is going to be helping you to support the project, we'd love to hear about it. And finally, we want to know about any partnerships or collaborators, outreach that you've done. If you can provide a proven track record for this type of project, that would be really helpful for us. Now I'm going to talk about the budget and the budget narrative. When you get to question number 8, you're going to see documents that look like this. And here is where you will need to describe all of your revenue for your project as well as expenses for your project. You want to make sure that the income or the revenue and the expenses balance. So whatever your total project revenue is, you need to have an equivalent amount of expenses. So make sure that that total at the bottom is the same, both for income or revenue and for expenses. Okay, another tip, there is a category that says other, and here you want to be specific. You can fill that section in. You'll also have the chance in the budget narrative to talk more about what each item on your budget means. So under revenue, notice that there is a section for other grants or for your own investments in the project. You don't have to have matching funds, but they can be really helpful and they can show that your organization is committed to your project. Also notice that for revenue, there will be a column that says projected and there will be a column that says confirmed. So that means, maybe you expect that you'll be able to bring in some funds from a particular organization, but you're not sure, you haven't confirmed it, then you'd check projected. If you absolutely know you'll be getting these funds, then you can check confirmed. You're also going to indicate whether the revenue for your project is cash or in kind. And I'm going to talk about that now. So in kind is talking about goods and services besides money. So that could be staff or volunteer time. That could be that you have the free use of a venue. Maybe you're going to print marketing materials using your in-house budget, etc. So it's not it's not money, it's goods and services. Some tips, you can calculate your volunteers' hourly rate at independentsector.org. Those are federal hourly rates for volunteers. Now, and this is important, make sure that if you're using in-kind revenue, that you're also listing it as an expense and vice versa, right? So if your volunteers are giving you their hours, make sure it's both listed on the revenue part of the budget document and on the expense part of the budget document. So the budget narrative is where you explain to us the details of your budget. So in the budget itself, you're giving us the basics, but here's where you can explain those to us. So each item, what do we need to know about that item to explain it? This is really important if you had a category that said other. So we want to know the most important information here about each of those items. Here's where you can give us more information. So if you're getting a discount on a particular venue, for example, you could explain that to us in the budget narrative. If you're getting grants from other organizations or you have other funding sources, here's where you can explain that to us. So again, anything in the budget itself that we might have questions about, please explain that for us in the budget narrative. Some tips. Make sure that the numbers in your budget and your budget narrative match. The budget narrative is meant to clear up any confusion. It should not be raising more questions for us. So just make sure that you're matching and comparing the budget and the budget narrative. Also, please don't include information that's not relevant to the project's budget. So again, the budget and the budget narrative, these are focused on the project itself. We don't need to get your organizational budget here. That can be provided separate. Here we're really looking for the project, so please don't include unrelated information. All right, so I have gone through all the questions on the application. I hope that you've gotten some helpful information about how to answer those questions. Once you've completed the questions for the grant application, you want to go through and make those finishing touches. So there's a checklist for you at the end of the application that you want to just make sure you're including everything that needs to be included. You want to make sure that you proofread the application. You're not able to spell check, for example, in the application itself. So you might want to type out your answers separately and then run a spell check and then copy paste back into the application itself. And finally, of course, check your numbers. Make sure that the two sides of your budget match, the expenses side and the revenue side. Make sure that the numbers provided in your budget match the numbers provided in your budget narrative. And once you've done that, you'll be all set and ready to submit. So at that point, what you can do is you can take your grant application and you can email it to admin@laneculture.net. You'll want to include the complete grant application, which should include the budget narrative. Include a copy of your organizational budget, again, separate from the grant application. If you have a statement of commitment for a particular venue, then you would want to include that. But that's all we want to see. We don't need any extra items. In fact, please don't include any items that we haven't specifically requested. We prefer email, but you can drop off or mail your application if you can't email it to us. Just remember, though, that applications must be received by 5 p.m. on October 14th. We unfortunately cannot make exceptions to that rule. So the Lane County Cultural Coalition has a number of helpful resources for you, many of which can be found on our website, which is laneculture.net. Here on the website, of course, you can find this recording. You can also find the application as well as our guidelines. You can find a detailed scoring rubric. The rubric that you find is the rubric that we use as board members when we score your applications. So you can see exactly what we're looking for when we read through these applications. I really recommend that you take a look at the rubric. You can also find information about previously funded grants and frequently asked questions. If you don't find what you need on our website, feel free to email us at info@laneculture.net. You are very welcome and encouraged to email us for mentoring. So if you would like to have a board member look over your application before you submit it, please email us and you'll be paired with a board member who can help you out. I hope that this video has been helpful for you. I hope that you have a better understanding of what we're looking for in these grant applications. And I hope that you're feeling confident in writing your own grant application. Again, feel free to contact us if you would like any guidance or support. Thank you.